Good afternoon and welcome to the Outdoor Recreation Council of BC January webinar. My name is Ryan Stewart. I'm hosting today's webinar. I'm going to give folks a few minutes. It takes a little bit for everybody to log in. And while they do that, I'd love to know a little bit more about who is tuning in today. The format of these webinars is such that the panelists, the folks that are speaking today, we can't see you. So love to know who is out there, who's signing in. Just maybe jump in the chat and add your name if you're affiliated with an organization and where you're logging in from. And for fun, just because the weather has been so crazy this January here in BC, I'd love to hear what you're getting up to recreation-wise all over the province. I'll pop that into the chat, so if you're just tuning in, you know what the question is. And when you do that, please make sure that you address it to everyone. You just have to change the to button there so it says everyone, and then everybody gets to see who else is out there. So I appreciate it if you do that. And while the rest of you weigh in, I'll let you know about today's webinar. We're going to learn about the Dene K'éh Kusān, a vision for the future management of an area of northern BC larger than Vancouver Island. We have several guests here from the Dena Kayeh Institute who will tell us more about how they are supporting that vision and how outdoor recreation fits into it. We'll leave lots of time for questions, and you can pop them into the chat at any time. We're recording today's webinar, and we will email you a link to the recording along with takeaways and any resources that we kind of discuss today in an email later this week. All right, so we're getting lots of big stuff, good stuff getting in there, snowshoeing and ski joring, and that sounds exciting and maybe slightly dangerous. Icy conditions, yeah, not surprised. That sounds like probably par for the course in most of the province. So, all right. Well, I think with that, I will just get going here with the webinar itself. So I'm going to share my screen and welcome you again. Good afternoon. I work with community engagement with the Outdoor Recreation Council of BC. That includes organizing and hosting our webinars. Welcome to today's webinar. And we're going to be learning about how recreation fits into the land use planning process and Indigenous protected and conserved areas through the lens of the Dene K'éh Kusān. This is a vast area of northern BC where the Kaska Dene have a vision for how they would like to manage and steward their traditional territory. Here's a map that gives you a little sense of what we're talking about today. Our speakers are from the Dena Kayeh Institute, and they'll talk about the Kaska Dene's approach to modernized land use planning and the proposed Dene K'éh Kusān Indigenous Protected and Conserved Area, or IPCA. This includes a shift to Indigenous-led stewardship through co-management and guardian programs. We'll also hear why recreation aligns with their goals and how the recreation community can get involved. You will see in the next few slides that this is a beautiful and stunning part of the province, and I'm really looking forward to learning more from our 5 guests. But first, I have a little bit of housekeeping I need to take care of. Here's the agenda. I'll provide a short introduction and then hand things over to our speakers. After the presentations, we'll have a dedicated question and answer session. If you have any questions during the webinar, please post them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen or in the chat. One of our guests might answer them directly. Otherwise, I'll do my best to ask them during the Q&A session. We'll wrap things up a little after 1 p.m. Pacific time. And immediately following this webinar is a super short survey. Please stick around to fill it out. It helps us do a better job with these webinars, and your feedback really does help us. This webinar is part of a monthly series hosted by the Outdoor Recreation Council of BC. The ORCBC represents 100 nonprofit organizations and more than 200,000 British Columbians. They're snowmobilers and hunters, climbers and hikers, conservation organizations, and mountain bike clubs. It's a very diverse group, and the ORCBC is the only provincial organization that represents all of them. We do this in many ways, including advocacy, capacity building, and education like this webinar. As a nonprofit, we rely on outside funding sources, including donations from people like you. All donations are tax deductible and eligible for tax receipt. You can find out more at orcbc.ca. Today's webinar is part of a series related to reconciliation and Indigenous relationship building. The series is made possible by the Real Estate Foundation of BC. The foundation funds projects, builds relationships, and shares knowledge to advance sustainable, equitable, and socially just land use and real estate practices across the province. REFBC is committed to supporting reconciliation with Indigenous people and working in partnership with First Nations. I will take this moment to also acknowledge that I am grateful to live, work, and play on the ancestral and traditional territories of the Comox First Nations here on Vancouver Island. Okay, let's get on to today's webinar. We have 5 people joining us today. It's a packed house. We have Michelle Miller. She's the Director of Culture and Land Stewardship for the Dena Kayeh Institute. Michelle is both Kaska and Tahltan ancestry. She's a member of the Delu Dena Council with deep roots in the Lower Post region of the Kaska ancestral territory. Bill Lux is a technical advisor for the Dena Kayeh Institute. Bill is a citizen of the Kaska Nation. He is a member of the Dease River First Nation and has deep roots in the Good Hope Lake region of the Kaska ancestral territory. Norm McLean is the technical advisor for the Dene Kayeh Institute, and Norm is a wildlife biologist with extensive experience working with the Kaska Nation for many years, providing technical assistance in wildlife management and land use planning. And Dave Crampton is the technical advisor for the Dene Kayeh Institute. He has a background in forestry and has worked extensively with the Kaska Nation for a decade, providing technical expertise in forestry and land use planning. And finally, we have David Muter. He's an Assistant Deputy Minister for the Land Use Planning and Cumulative Effects in the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship. He's joining us to tell us more about the government's land use planning and IPCA processes and answer any technical questions we have that come up during the conversation. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand things over to David Muter to get us started and tell us a little bit more, kind of give us that general overview of the IPCAs and land use planning in general from the province's perspective.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. Is my sound coming through okay still?
Yep, you sound great. Thanks, David.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. And I'm joining you today from the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. As you can see, I'm kind of mobile today. And I want to begin by sharing a sincere thanks to the kind invitation to the Outdoor Rec Council for the opportunity to be here today. It's opportunities like this where we get a chance to connect, tell a little bit about the work we're doing, and then to hear ideas and thoughts and questions from others. So I really appreciate this opportunity. As Ryan mentioned, what I'm going to go through is an overview of the provincial construct for land use planning. That's a good precursor that can then lead into the details on the Kaska land use planning project that'll be shared right after me. So land use planning, it is that process that we use to set the strategic direction for the use of land. What can be done and where can it be done on land? In BC, that's on Crown land that we focus on. And when it's done well, it gives a chance for all of us to engage and reflect on the values and how we want to see the land used in a way that provides for the assurance of those values into the future. There are land use plans around the province already. Almost 80%, 90%, I think, of the province is covered by land use plans today. And those were done through the 90s and in the early 2000s, some later 2000s. But many of them are dated. Many of them as well were not developed in partnership with First Nations, nor were they even engaged in the land use planning process. And so many of the land use plans that we have in the province right now are inconsistent with the requirements of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. As well, many of those land use plans developed in the 90s, they're inconsistent with the values that we would have today as British Columbians. And so many people look at what is there and say, well, this is no longer something that we want to see managed that way into the future. Or the environment around British Columbia has changed, and that requires us to look at these land use plans and update them. Climate change is probably the most significant example of that. If we don't adapt and manage better for the impacts of a warming climate, the values that we have of interest may not be there. And so while land use plans exist around the province, for these multitude of reasons, there's a need for us to work together to update them. and in cases where we don't have a land use plan to apply and do that work in areas where there isn't one. The province takes a partnership approach to land use planning, and that's the core of how we do this. We partner with First Nations, and in that partnership, we together define the necessary engagement and involvement of communities, the public, stakeholders, to make sure that the land use planning work that we do together in partnership reflects those values and reflects that interest of what do we want to see on the land into the long term. Land use planning generally follows 4 stages, and we try to be very transparent about this so that everybody can follow along the process that we're undertaking in land use planning. We begin by clearly initiating the land use plan. We want people to know when we've started a land use plan. So that typically comes with some form of announcement, an information notice, and then sharing of information to make sure people are aware that a new process is beginning. In the second step, we would go through developing the land use plan, engaging with folks to understand interests and values and how to apply those on the landscape. And that would come in together in a draft land use plan. In step 3, we would be evaluating that land use plan and bringing it forward for approval, moving into step 4 where we'd implement it. We want to make sure people know these steps so that they can follow along the process in a transparent way, and that we can be inclusive to make sure that if people know where the process is going, they have a chance to participate in that planning process. The easier it is to provide for input to the land use planning process, the more clarity we're going to have, the more clarity on what values are important, where those values exist on the land base, and how we should be drafting management objectives or guidance to make sure that we see those values into the future. We're going to hear a lot of great detail about the Kaska land use planning process. But if you want to see an example of how a land use planning moves into implementation, we recently completed a land use plan on Vancouver Island with Namgis First Nation. And if you look up on our planning partnerships or you look up the Guatni land use plan, you can see the details of that. This is a process we completed in partnership with Namgis. It involved engagement of the public, of stakeholders, of industry, local governments, and it resulted in a series of recommendations that improved the stewardship of the Nipkish watershed, an area that's of key importance to the Namgis First Nation, and a land use planning process that resulted in methods of improving stewardship of that area. So if you want to see where we're going, that's an example of a land use plan that's just recently been completed in partnership with Namgis First Nation. Again, thank you for the kind invitation to hear. And as well, I want to share a tremendous thanks and celebration outreach to the Kaska First Nation for their work on this land use plan. I can remember, I think it was 2019 when I first met Dave Crampton, and he gave a very thoughtful, detailed brief for the provincial government that was very inspiring to the depth of work that Kaska First Nations have done, the thoughtful approach to land use planning. They've been working on this for quite some time, and it's been an absolute pleasure to work with them and to share opportunities like this to gather more input from folks. I'll leave it there, and I look forward to questions and comments. And Ryan, I'll pass it back to you to go to the next speaker. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that. Michelle, I'll hand it over to you to let us know a little bit more about the vision that the Kaska Nation has. Oh, you're muted there, Michelle.
Whoops.
Happens to us all.
Yeah, maybe it's the 180 participants. I think this is the biggest crowd of people I've presented to in a webinar, so bear with me. Thank you, Ryan, and thanks, David, for that kind of high-level presentation on land use planning in the province. So Kaska have a short PowerPoint presentation that we'll go through with you today, talking about Dene K'éh Kusān and land use planning in Kaska's traditional territory. So while I get that ready, I just want to thank everyone, all the members joining us today. Let me just try to multitask here. Okay, so everyone can see the PowerPoint, hopefully.
Yep.
So thank you for taking the time. We appreciate all the members of ORCBC being a part of this conversation. I'm sure many of you have, just seeing in the chat, all the activities and recreational activities that people are doing is awesome. So I'm sure you have some deep experiences throughout the landscape in Northern BC. So today we're here to talk to you about Dene K'éh Kusān. So in Kaska, that means always will be there. So this is the Indigenous protected and conserved area that the Kaska are working on in our traditional territory. So just an overview of the presentation topics that we'll go over today. So the Dene K'éh Kusān and what makes this area so remarkable. What allowable uses. So you heard David mention and talk about, the use of the land in land use planning. So that is a part of it of what type of allowable uses will be allowed within the Dene K'éh Kusān and what that means for outdoor enthusiasts, co-management. Again, David's opening comments about a partnership approach with this work. So co-management, and why is that a good thing within Dene K'éh Kusān and in land use planning. And then we'll talk a bit about the Kaska land use planning, where we are and what's next. And then, talk a little bit about how recreation, yourselves as members of the recreation society, can offer support for Dene K'éh Kusān. So I think one of the biggest things about the Dene K'éh Kusān and what makes it so remarkable is it is one of the largest intact landscapes within British Columbia. So I think what that means on the ground is long stretches of landscape without roads. Healthy predator and prey systems. So when we talk about, the wildlife values within Dene K'éh Kusān, it's home of 7 woodland caribou herds. It's home to moose, sheep, migratory birds. I think that also speaks to clean headwaters and connected watersheds. And I think, this is the type of remoteness and landscape that's becoming increasingly rare, and that's why Kaska want to work toward conserving and protecting it. But I think these are the exact qualities that help make outdoor recreation meaningful and increasingly hard to find elsewhere. I think speaking to the cultural values within Dene K'éh Kusān, so our Dene K'éh Kusān is 40,000 square kilometers within a core piece of the Kaska's traditional territory. So when we talk about cultural values, we're talking about, Kaska's stewardship and Kaska laws and how those values will provide guidance within Dene K'éh Kusān. We're talking about stewardship that is continuous. So the Kaska have their Dene and Yada guardian program. So our guardians will play a key role in the stewardship of Dene K'éh Kusān. And I think this protection is paired with the use of the land, the responsibility that Kaska hold as stewards of Dene K'éh Kusān. And I think, why stewardship matters in the context of recreation is healthy wildlife populations don't happen by accident. Clean rivers don't stay clean on their own. So a stewardship, especially long-term place-based stewardship, is one of the main reasons that these landscapes still function the way they do. And I think DKK is about continuing that stewardship, so recreation experiences don't slowly disappear. So I just want to pause here in our slide or in our presentation to speak to some of these pictures here. We always say photos can speak 1,000 words. So this photo here, oops, how do I go? Oh, there we go. There's a photo there of my son and I actually this summer we all went across the river. So the community that I'm from of Lower Post, BC, we went across the river, and this cabin is the start of what we call the Atsu Davy Trail. Excuse me. So this trail is it starts in Lower Post, and it's a connection to our Kaska brothers and sisters in Fort Ware. And Kaska are looking at restoring this trail. So we're and I think it's a good example of like travel corridors that the Kaska used to use that we're looking at restoring. And it's a good example of sharing these opportunities in regards to recreation as we move forward. So that, you know, we kind of hiked up the trail there, and we were looking to restore that. We've also got some pictures here of, you know, Bill, who's on the call with us. Him and another couple colleagues went down the Gataga River. So, you know, I think it's just showing, you know, the beauty and the availability of use throughout the protected area. So just talking about, as I mentioned, some allowable uses. So I think this is one of the common questions that we hear is about access. And, you know, does this mean that the land will be closed? And the answer is no. DKK is not about removing people from the land, but it's about keeping the land open in the right ways for the long term. You know, we're talking about allowable uses that have low impact activities such as hiking, fishing, trapping, paddling, you know, backcountry travel. Those are all allowable uses within our stewardship plan for Dene K'éh Kusān. I think, you know, what will be managed differently is about, you know, that no industrial scale or high development within Dene K'éh Kusān. And I think why this matters to recreational users is it creates healthy wildlife population. It maintains that wilderness character and the remoteness that I talked about with the limited access that's there right now. But also provides certainty around access in the future. I think without proactive planning, access can become uncertain over time. So, you know, within planning and having a stewardship plan for Dene K'éh Kusān, that'll help create that certainty. So you know, when wildlife declines, you know, when development pressures increase or decisions are made far away from the land, the restrictions tend to happen suddenly and reactively, but DKK is meant to do the opposite. So with Dene K'éh Kusān, it's meant to create more clarity around use and allowable uses. They're there to help set expectations earlier and avoid surprises. And I think importantly is keeping decisions grounded in local knowledge. And I welcome my team to contribute to any of the conversation here. I know I'm kind of moving quickly and around, talking a lot. So anytime you want to add, please feel free. So stewardship of the DKK, so co-management, and why is this a good thing? So co-management, I think, simply means decisions are shared and informed by the people who know the land the best. And it's also working, as David said, in partnership with the province. You know, it's about shared responsibility to manage and protect Dene K'éh Kusān, and it's about Kaska Nation and the government working together in regards to land use planning and moving toward the protection of Dene K'éh Kusān. It means that decisions are grounded in Kaska law, in, you know, modern science, so that it's incorporating those together, and also in lived experience, like I say, for that local knowledge piece. It's about working with the land. Really is what it's about. And I think what that creates for recreational users is more clear expectations. You know, that local knowledge is guiding decisions. So talking about our stewardship plan within Dene K'éh Kusān, and it also creates and speaks to long-term stability for access and use as we move forward in this planning process. So this is the part I will turn over to Bill and Dave and Norm to talk about land use planning within the DKK and outside of the DKK.
Thanks, Michelle. I can start with that, Norm. I think the piece that Michelle just mentioned, which is the critical piece, is that there's an area surrounding the Dene K'éh Kusān that is still within the Kaska ancestral territory, and it constitutes another 6 or so million hectares that's outside of the context of DKK. And what's important about the kind of planning that we're involved with the province is that the adjacency to a spectacular area like the Dene K'éh Kusān requires that we do the kind of planning that provides for the opportunities of movement of animals, not a strict line in the trees that delineates between a protected area like, or a conserved area like Dene K'éh Kusān and the areas outside of it. So that means that any of the work that we're doing, we're in the context of climate change. That would mean that any forestry activities and mining activities that exist outside of Dene K'éh Kusān have to be done in the context of Dene K'éh Kusān itself. So we think that that is a real important opportunity for us to do things a bit differently with the existing plans, which are the old LRMPs, the old Easley Ards, SLUPA, and another Mackenzie LRMP, not to change them dramatically, but to make sure that they're in the context of where we are in 2026 and in the future. And in the context of having such a spectacular area as DKK in the center of it. So we're trying to do that management, do the planning with British Columbia and with other First Nations who are our neighbors, and with many, many people like yourselves and local stakeholders that are in Fort Nelson, et cetera, to make sure that everybody's interests are looked after, and that into the long term. And in the specifics of that is that even within the area outside Dene K'éh Kusān, there's still opportunities for recreation and for outdoor activities to take place. And inside and outside, we would be looking for joint ventures, we'd be looking for co-management structures with other interested parties to help us in that kind of work. So I'm not going to say very much more about that, but I'll let Norm, if you've got something to add to that, if you're there.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, as Dave mentioned, we're looking at, with the existing plans, how, because there are a number of them in the planning area in the Kaska ancestral territory in BC, how are we looking to modernize language that's required, but where there is management direction already that makes sense and is still relevant today, to leave that as is. In relation to other work that's going on, there is a socio-economic environmental assessment analysis going on. It's right now we're bringing together the base line and base case studies for that, which will help support information about when we look at what does it mean in relation to what currently is environmentally, socially, culturally, and economic values that sit within the proposed Dene K'éh Kusān, sits outside that and across the ancestral territory. And that'll be shared with public as well. And will then help be another tool that we can all look to, and we're looking at what potential updates to plans could be occurring through this work. And with the Dene K'éh Kusān. So I'll leave that there, unless you want to add anything else, Dave.
No, that's great, Norm.
All right, so I'd like to introduce myself, Bill Lux, Kaska Dene. I reside in Good Hope Lake as part of our Kaska Nation. I am here joining you from the out of respect of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh ancestral homelands in Vancouver. And I'm happy that for those who are here, really appreciate your participation. I know that the Dave, and Norm has not provided me much more to add, but I'm going to give you my perspective as Kaska. And thank you, Dave, and Norm. Want to add that. And the very first photo you've seen is an area known to many as the Boya Lake Park, historically known as Chain Lakes. Our language is Tachila. Tachila means laying down a blanket full of holes. So when you go back to that picture, and I don't encourage you to do that, is look at the map, look at that area, and you'll see the Chain Lakes as and picture in your mind, and our ancestral elders. When you look at it, it looks like a blanket full of holes. The lakes represent the holes, and that's why we changed the name to Tachila. I want to share that with those who know and are familiar with my backyard. And when it comes to the Dene K'éh Kusān, our Indigenous protected area, 4 million hectares. And this is supported not just by Kaska, it's supported by others through land use planning direction, through the LRMP of Fort Nelson, the Mackenzie, who all recommended the very same vision that we see as stewardships of our traditional homelands. And the only difference from the MK is simply that we don't foresee any resource development, mining, oil and gas. I've been at this, when I moved home for 35 years, and I've never seen a road built as of yet south of Delu, or north of Kodacha, or west of Muncho. And we all, simply because we all share the same values. We want to maintain wilderness. We want to experience and protect that for future generations. And so at the end of the day, we're all on the same page. And I know, and Dave, thank you for earlier to talk about land use planning and why this is part of the process. And so the whole intent here, and I'm not going to ramble, I'm just going to share with you my perspective as Dena, is the intent here is to reach the decision by the Kaska leadership, by the provincial government, to designate this area as a Kaska Indigenous protected area. And then as part of the process is to complete a review and update of existing plans. We've got a number, and for those who are familiar with our ancestral homelands, are familiar with our existing land use plans. And we want, as Dave and Norm spoke earlier, we want to update those because they were done back in 1997 to 2016. And some of them we weren't involved in, like the Fort Nelson LRMP, others like the Mackenzie we were involved in, the Dees-Liard, we actually initiated that. So all these plans exist, and all the recreation opportunities that you all enjoy in our homelands, and we welcome it, will continue. And we'll find creative ways to continue to protect the experience and moving forward. And so as Norm and Dave spoke, our job is to work with the province and to take these land use plans and to update them, to incorporate the 4 things that we've never seen, like climate change, like cumulative effects, and being able to bring those up to date, and the DRIPA Act, legislative act in British Columbia, and to work together to make sure that, some of these existing plans in our ancestral homelands do not represent our cultural values, and traditions, and we want to make sure that that's built into and respected as we move forward in partnership. And to be bringing forward clarity and consistency in any future decisions to protect our values, recreational user values, guide outfitting, trapping, the recreational users. We all share the same vision. And then how do we find that balance? How do we work together and make sure these plans will do that? And really appreciate that you taking the time to hear us out and take the opportunity to engage with us, to work and move forward to make sure that the province makes the decisions that is right for all of us in partnership and build our relationship. So that's what I'd like to add. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Norm and Dave. How can you as recreation enthusiasts offer support? So I think you know exactly what we're doing here today, and it's sharing information, sharing values, common values. So staying informed, sharing that respectful input, what we're doing today, help identify what matters most for you as recreational users, building relationships, supporting Indigenous-led stewardship. And when I talk about Indigenous-led stewardship, I think it simply means, stewardship decisions that are grounded in Kaska laws, responsibility, and knowledge systems, right? Which I know are not different than values of a lot of the recreational users out there. It's just how do we steward and protect the land in a good way? As well as we also have a statement of support on our website that you can go to and sign that statement of support to show how important it is to protect such a beautiful landscape, and keep showing that recreation and stewardship belong together. I think recreational users are already part of stewardship, whether it's intentional or not. So I think continuing to show that they belong together and not compete. They're not competing with each other. So as I mentioned, so we do have our website, so denekayeh.com. You can go there and we have a number of short videos that you can watch that talk about what is a Indigenous protected and conserved area. And I think, another part of that support piece is helping others understand what is a Indigenous protected and conserved area. What does it actually mean? And not to be fearful of it. So we have a bunch of videos. We have a wonderful documentary on our protected area, Dene K'éh Kusān. So you're welcome. We have a number of FAQs and resources available for you to check out. So with that, I just want to say that we, as Kaska, appreciate all the members coming on to take time to engage in this conversation, to participate in this conversation. Dene K'éh Kusān is not about choosing between conservation and recreation, but it's about making sure that both of it has a future. Kaska look forward to continuing this dialogue with the members of ORCBC, and look forward to any questions that you may have. And Mussy, thank you very much.
Thank you all. That was a really excellent presentation. Lots of information in there. Maybe we could just start off though. Michelle, you sort of mentioned this before we started this webinar too, that it's very easy to confuse the land use planning process and then the IPCA process. So maybe one of you or somebody can sort of talk a little bit about, like, are these two different processes that are happening in parallel to each other, or is the IPCA sort of ingrained in that land use planning process? Or maybe could you talk a little bit about that and how these two processes sort of work together?
Sure, Dave, do you want to?
I can start if you'd like. Yeah, sure. There are four, as we alluded to a little earlier, there are four distinct components to the land use planning in the ancestral territory. IPCA, the Dene K'éh Kusān, is one of them. One is taken up by the area in the northeast around the old LRMP from Port Nelson. The other one in the northwest is from the Deasley Yard area, which the Kaska and the province of British Columbia put together that land use plan. And the southernmost one, which incorporates the land use planning from Mackenzie District. So there are 4 distinct plans in operation or will be operating. However, the 3 on the periphery of the Dene K'éh Kusān will have similar language in terms of the way they're constructed, so that a proponent can take a look at those and understand exactly what it is, i.e. the language that's associated with them in each of those 3 areas, where Dene K'éh Kusān, of course, is a protected area in the context of an IPCA, and therefore will have very different constructs in it, not the least of which I think needs the biggest differentiation, of course, is that there'll be no any extraction, natural resource extraction, forestry, mining, oil and gas, etc., within the boundary of the Dene K'éh Kusān. So that does make it different. And as I said earlier in what I was discussing, at the area on the periphery, which constitutes 3 different plans, will take into the context of their designs, of their planning, what's going on within the Dene K'éh Kusān, so that we don't have abrupt lines. We have continuity between what can happen. And in this case, looking at the opportunity for outdoor recreation that exists within the area on the periphery as well. It's not as if that's turning into a wasteland. It's an area that's going to be well looked after, stewarded by the Kaska throughout that area. And we should be just as happy to be recreating in that part of the world as we are within the Dene K'éh Kusān itself. Thanks, Michelle.
David Muter, maybe you can just weigh in on that too, from maybe that wider provincial perspective. And we have a question in the chat that I think is maybe a good way of sort of framing it, asking the difference between an IPCA and a provincial park that participates in a First Nations consultation process. Can you talk a little bit about some of those differences and how the situation with the DKK compares to other IPCA processes in the province?
Yeah. Dave Crampton's answer on the distinction between the 3 around and then within the DKI, that's very good, and I wouldn't have anything to add to that. What I would say is that when it comes to provincial laws and policies for enacting protections, there is no currently IPCA designation. So the provincial government doesn't have a legal tool that it can apply to say this area is now an Indigenous protected conserved area. And so what we do is we go through what we're doing right now, a land use planning process, and then we try to the best extent we can to enact the vision for that IPCA using an aggregation of various different provincial tools. It is not complete. There are likely going to be gaps that the provincial government will have to continue to work with nations to close. But here, in the Dene K'éh Kusān, one could expect, we're not there yet, but one could expect that some form of provincial legal designation in the form of a conservancy or other such thing can enact protections that achieve part of the vision of the IPCA. Other tools and governance matters we'll have to explore and figure out in order to address the full vision of that IPCA. So because we don't have a tool that is IPCA here, we created an aggregate through various different tools. And the way we inform that is through the engagement and the land use planning process we're undertaking right now.
All right, so that's helpful. So do you anticipate the province will one day create an IPCA tool, sort of like it has for a Class A provincial park, for instance, or do you think it will always be a little bit more, because these are unique in every circumstance to a certain extent, because each nation and its desires are different? Will they always be sort of something you'll have to like kind of mold together case by case?
Yeah, it is a tricky thing. You're absolutely right. They are unique. The landscapes are different. The interests of each nation are unique. And even the IPCAs themselves are unique across the province. We don't have a mandate to initiate IPCA legislation right now, so it's not currently on the list of things that the provincial government is focused on. But we do note that the creation of enacting an IPCA vision through the aggregation of provincial tools doesn't often fully address what is necessary. So we are aware of that gap, and we'll have to continue to work on that.
Thanks. Bill, I see your hands up there. What would you like to add?
Yes, thank you very much, Ryan. Very good question. I'm glad you raised it through the chat. Yes, this is not a federal park. It's not a provincial park. And thank you, Dave, for doing an overview of the steps we need to take, because currently the provincial government does not have any legislation to implement, and that's what we're trying to address. The big step here is once this is where the parties agree, the Kaska leadership and the province agrees to designate this IPCA, it will not become federal jurisdiction. We hear this from time to time. I just want to make sure it's clear to everybody. This is in partnership with the provincial government. This is in partnership. When Kaska speaks to a partnership with the provincial government, it's a representation of BC residents, all those who enjoy our lands and continue to enjoy those lands. And so when we designate the IPCA, it will be a Kaska-led, Indigenous protected and conserved area. And how we manage it is through the stewardship plan. It's a plan within itself, and it's separate from land use plans, where we all will agree to how it's managed when it comes to activities other than resource development, and how to move forward collectively. And so that's the difference. I just want to share that with that answer and that question that came up. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Bill. I think that was good clarity on that. We have a couple questions in the Q&A here. So let's maybe start with the first one. Will all land use plans become higher level plans? David Muter, can you comment on that?
Yeah, not necessarily. It sort of depends. So land use planning, I do describe as that strategic direction for what can be done on the land and where. But specifically what the result of a land use planning process is can vary. So sometimes it results in a very specific amendment to an existing land use plan. Sometimes it results in the designation of new zones or objectives for those zones, which could be seen as higher level plans. In some cases, it results in a commitment to restoration, to monitoring, and those sorts of investments. So not always does it end up there, though that is certainly a possibility.
Thank you. For the Dene K'éh Kusān, how is the project being funded? How is all this work being done, and where does the money come from? Michelle, maybe can you answer that?
Hi. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously in partnership with the province. And I think, along this work, we're always looking at the bigger picture and looking at how do we maintain this long term and make it sustainable. So I think, funding is always a question. And we look to partners and other organizations to contribute to some of the work that we're doing.
All right. Dave Wharton, who is on the board of the Outdoor Recreation Council, asking about motorized recreation. Maybe David Crampton, do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah. Sure. Just before we get there, you're asking the question of how do we fund this? One of the unique components of what we're directing our energies towards is a conservation economy. As we are restricting any natural resource extraction within the Dene K'éh Kusān, we have to have something else to take its place. So that would include many, many opportunities for what we would call then a conservation economy. So that's everything from tourism, it could be carbon offsetting, it could be guide outfitting in some areas. There are a number of areas that we're trying to encourage engagement, not only from within the Kaska, but certainly from participants, particularly people in the Outdoor Recreation Council, to engage with us to provide opportunities for an economy that exists outside of natural resource extraction. So that gate is wide open for ideas. We have tried to go at some heli skiing in the area, which of course has failed because there isn't enough non avalanche terrain in the area. So we've tried a few things in the past and had a bit of fun doing it. Being a skier, I was pretty interested in trying to get something going there, but that doesn't happen. But try fishing, one of my other passions. There's an awful lot of opportunities there for fish guiding, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to go on at length there either, but there are many, many opportunities in a conservation economy that we want to try and address and explore.
Yeah, I can only imagine the fishing up there must be spectacular.
Yeah.
So the question we were getting to there just before was from Dave Wharton, wondering about motorized recreation within the IPCA. Is that considered an allowable, something that you would allow in that area? Bill?
Yes. When it comes to access, is a huge concern for all of us. I mean, we don't want to encourage any major new roads because there's not going to be any industrial development in this in the Dene K'éh Kusān. And what exists today is where we want to try to maintain. And we all recognize front country activities, whereby along the Alaska Highway and north of Kuracha, where there's existing roads and where there's existing access for local recreational use like snowmobiles and ATVs, will continue. But when it comes to new access on recreation, that's where we've got to, through the stewardship plan, collective with the province in partnership, is to make those decisions through good governance. We're not here, and I'm sure that everyone on this line isn't here to build new access in an area that doesn't have any. We've got access by jet boats. We've got access from trapline holders, trail rides from guide outfitters. And we've got to maintain that approach. Where there's opportunity from front country, yes, we'll explore those opportunities as the industry expands. But I'm confident that we all agree that building a road from Kuracha north that you can drive a quad or a pickup ain't going to happen in my lifetime. So I'm hope that people agree with me. So thank you.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, just to add to it, Bill, it's about how can that use happen responsibly, right? How do that access and the use of motorized vehicle happen responsibly within the Dene K'éh Kusān?
Yeah, yeah. I wonder with the mountain caribou, we've seen that where snowmobile clubs work really closely with biologists to figure out ways where you can have those two coexist, mountain caribou without scaring them from their in the winter habitat. I mean, do you see things like that happening where you're sort of looking for ways of balancing those two and where they can happen and when and things like that? Bill?
Yeah, I haven't seen, or our communities, excuse me, haven't seen a referral or an interest expressed today to do hella skiing, hella hiking, or otherwise in the Dene K'éh Kusān, right? And we all recognize that. We all want to go out there and want to experience the visual, the wilderness qualities, and we want to maintain that. If and when an application or an expression of interest comes forward, that's going to go through the stewardship plan and determine whether that's compatible with the intent of the IPCA, the Kaska IPCA. So that's going to be down the road, I think 10 years or more, because I've been at this for a long time. Our family's got history. All our families have history on the land. And in the past 40 years, I have yet to see a road that supports anything, recreational or otherwise, in this area that we all support and appreciate. So yeah, it'll take time, and I don't foresee any major changes, but we look forward to any expressive interest, and hopefully it'll work through the stewardship plan and the governance and decision making of that process. Thank you.
Norm, you'd like to add something?
Yeah, I mean, agreeing with Bill. I mean, you look at the communities in and around even the Kaska ancestral territory in BC, but certainly around Dene K'éh Kusān. I mean, they're very small, remote communities, and to get into Dene K'éh Kusān, there are some, existing access trails through Musqueam, but really, for recreational snowmobile use, for those who do come and want to do that, it's a very small, historically a small number of people doing it, and their footprint is pretty small, at that landscape scale. And really, for the northern mountain caribou we're talking about, they tend to wander into the trees for the winter because the snow gets too high up in the higher elevations. They're a bit different from the central and southern mountain caribou, who tend to hang out year round in the alpine. So there hasn't been a conflict to date, I guess what I'm saying, between the remoteness of the landscape we're talking about and the actual number of people who pursue that as a recreational interest. It's pretty small.
Yeah, yeah. We just had one more question pop up in the chat there. What does co-management look like? Is it only for the IPCA, or would it overlap into the LUPs on the outside as well? Someone want to jump in there? Bill?
Hey, where there's opportunity, I'll always take it. So just so you know me, Ryan. Yes, when it comes to decision-making governance, the land use plan that we're reviewing and updating to address a number of issues lays out the direction of future uses and development. And when it comes to the Dene K'éh Kusān, the stewardship plan provides for a governance model. The first step for us is to get the support and the designation by the province and the Kaska leadership to designate the area. We talk about governance. The governance model is simply a model that represents the province and the Kaska as the government. And and then co-management is where we work with the Kaska, work with Fort Nelson First Nations, and they they play a role as co-managers in the decision making. And then as the governance body is developed, then you create a working group whereby when the time is appropriate to invite the expertise of recreational users, guide outfitters, or otherwise to develop policies and direction that would help decisions going forward on the intent of the IPCA. So the governance model is an opportunity that would provide for everyone who supports the intent of the stewardship plan and what we're managing for. So there'll be opportunity for that. But until we get the designation of the Kaska Indigenous Protected Area in place, then we can talk more about the governance model. We can't move forward because if you don't have a designation and agreement, you're just taking up everyone else's time, when our focus should be to complete the land use plans, get the support we need, and then move to the next steps. So yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Well, we're almost out of time here. So maybe just quickly on that point, you shared some of the ways that the recreation community can share their support and give some input on the DKI, and we'll include that in our follow-up email with the recording so people can find that easily. David Muter, when it comes to IPCAs and land use planning in general, what should the recreation community know for their options for engaging and staying up to date and taking part in these processes?
On a provincial basis, we welcome input, and we've got a webpage, planningpartnerships.bc. Go have a look there. You can find out details about all the land use planning projects underway in the province, and they all have a little place where you can click to say, register your email for project updates. There's often a place, depending on the stage of engagement that they're at, where people can share their interest statement or reach out and get specific questions answered. So I encourage your folks to have a look at planningpartnerships.ca or reach out to me directly. Happy to hear from folks and answer questions.
All right. Well, I think with that, I see that Louise popped the link there in the chat if everyone's looking for it. I'll also include the link to that page that David just mentioned in the follow-up. We are out of time though, so I'll just thank everyone for taking part, all of our speakers. I appreciate you taking the time to be here today. And appreciate everyone in the audience for coming and listening and asking great questions. Again, we will share a recording of today's presentation with links to a lot of these points that we've raised, websites we've talked about, things like that. I'd like to also thank the Real Estate Foundation of BC for making this webinar possible. This is part of a regular series of webinars. We do them every month. You can find out more about our next webinar topic and everything else the Outdoor Recreation Council is doing by subscribing to the newsletter at orcbc.ca. Finally, please stick around for the survey. It helps us do a better job with these webinars and cover topics that you want to see. It loads as soon as the webinar is closed. And with that, I will say good afternoon, goodbye. Thanks again to everyone that took part. Everyone, yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Ryan.